Yesterday, the leaders of Mexico and Canada struck last-minute deals with President Trump that put a one-month pause on the new tariffs that the U.S. planned to implement today on their respective countries' exports to the United States. Now, the new tariffs on Chinese products, however, went into effect at 12:01 a.m. this morning, and China, in response, hit back with a broad package of economic measures targeting the U.S. that will take effect February the 10th. Well, that does give time for the U.S. and China to work out a deal. If one isn't struck, what could be the impact of that? And what could be the impact on these new tariffs on all three countries if they happen to go into place? And is this an effective tool for helping shape policy? Joining me now to discuss this is economist Jerry Bowyer, President and CEO of Bowyer Research. Jerry, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So first, for our viewers who may not be well-versed when it comes to tariffs, can you give us a kind of a brief explainer on what they are and how they work?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's confusing about them is that they're called tariffs when they're just taxes. So let's just make it simpler. Let's get rid of the word tariff. So it's a tax. Well, what is being taxed? What's being taxed is goods or services that are purchased from overseas producers. So if you buy avocados that are coming from Mexico, when the avocados are coming into the United States, there's an extra tax put on them. There is an illusion that somehow you're taxing the avocados. Well, you're not paying avocados don't pay taxes. They just become guacamole. So who pays the taxes? Does Mexico pay them? Well, in the end, taxes are paid by consumers. Taxes on business are really paid by consumers in the end. That's the last transaction in the production and sale of something. In the end, all the goods, all the productivity, all the costs show up in the price that we pay.
And that's what the argument that conservatives make here in the United States domestically is that when we add taxes, it's the consumer that ultimately ends up paying for it. Same thing here. But the penalty, I assume, that then flows to the exporting country is that people won't buy the product because it costs too much.
Right, exactly, because you're increasing the cost of the product, you probably get less of it. And then the idea is that maybe avocado farmers in California, who are not as efficient because California is not super business friendly, maybe they'll be able to sell more avocados because Mexico loses part of its pricing advantage. So it decreases competition. So really that's the intent, is to decrease competition and increase the price for goods that are just produced here in the United States. I mean, but it's so odd. The argument that I just made, conservatives make that argument all the time, that taxes are paid by consumers. And somehow we think that magically, well, no, that doesn't apply when something's from another country. If it's a computer chip or an avocado, then the laws of economics don't apply. They still do. Now, it might be worth paying that price. Let's say we have a border crisis and Mexico is not helping, and then you threaten a tariff to get them to help stop the illegal crossings for the sake of national security. Okay, great. That's not an economic argument, and that's a pretty good argument. And if that's what we're doing, if in the end this is just an attempt to get them to stop illegal border crossing and send 10,000 troops, great, sign me up. But sometimes the president also makes just the arguments from 300 years ago about how great it is to have taxes on trade, and history has shown that to not be accurate. It's not good for the economy. It's not even good it isn't good for Americans, because then they just counter tariff us. Right. So if we tax goods coming from China, there might be geopolitical reasons to do so, but then it just goes through Vietnam instead. They find a way around. What do? Well, they tax pork. So, what are we doing? We might be helping people here in Pittsburgh who import steel, but we're hurting hog farmers. So tariffs tend to be treated as siding with us against foreigners, but in reality, historically in America, they've always been siding with one kind of American against another kind of American. Typically, tariffs support the Northeast manufacturing centers and hurt the South and the Midwest farming centers.
So Jerry, the scenario you laid out is my understanding of both the tariffs for Canada and Mexico are dealing with border issues, drugs coming across, the illegal crossings, and he's trying to get them to step up to the table and take responsibility for what is happening at the border on their side. Now, so far, it seems to have brought them to that table of wanting to deal with this issue and put off the tariffs. But let's talk broader economics. If we have these, now China's going forward, possibly. We got a couple weeks there to work that one out. But let's say these were in place. What does that do from a macro perspective? You described micro, what it does to the hog farmers, what it does to the steel producers. But what about the overall economy?
Well, it slows down the growth of the overall economy, and it causes prices to rise because price competition, going back to Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, is one of the things that's made capitalism so effective. So there's this idea of division of labor, that there are some things that are really good. Some places, like America's not really good at growing cocoa, but sub-Saharan Africa is really good at growing cocoa. We're really good at making microchips. Sub-Saharan Africa is not so good at that. I look at this theologically. God has spread out his gifts among the whole human family. And a few hundred years ago, theologians started to come forward to talk about global trade and saying the providence of God, he made us need one another so that we're less likely to war with one another. And it's better to trade. And I think that's right. So I think in general, it's inflationary because it cuts down on that division of labor. This idea, you even find it in the Bible that the body has different organs, right?
Different members.
Yeah, exactly. And that works in economics too. That comes into Adam Smith. So it's really better if we trade with one another rather than war with one another, and that drives prices down. So tariffs tend to be inflationary. The president ran on an anti-inflation a program, and that's why he got support. And that's one of the reasons I supported him.
I'm not sure that Adam Smith had met Donald Trump, though. When you look at he's using
Donald Trump had met Adam Smith.
He's using this as a negotiating gambit, and I mean he's unusual. And I think part of the issue here is people don't know what he'll do, and so it does bring them to the table of negotiations.
Right.
But the reality is, this is a double-edged sword, is it not?
It is, and I'm for what's been happening so far. I mean, what he did with Colombia was astonishing. Between the third hole and the 18th hole on a golf course, he got Colombia to take back its criminal element. I thought that was amazing. Yay, I'm all for that. But sometimes the president or his supporters talk as though tariffs are good in the long run and that they're good for the economy. I'm sorry, we have 300 years of experience with this, and maybe we've forgotten, but they are not good in the long run. And we need to learn the lessons of history. America moved away from tariffs for a reason. They were part of the Civil War, frankly. The South didn't want tariffs. The North did want tariffs. Yes, slavery is definitely an issue, but tariffs were an issue as well. They play Americans against one another. So if these are negotiating tactics for international security, I'm all for it. If this is the new economic program, protectionism, we know it doesn't work.
Yeah,
so I just hope and pray the president is just doing the first and not the second.
I think it is the former. But let's jump to China. Okay, let's talk about that for a moment, because that's still an unknown. They're now slapping some tariffs back on the United States. And there is an imbalance in trade with China. China is, I think, in a category all by itself. It is a threat to the United States. How does tariff play into that bigger relationship with China?
Well, it's really complicated. It's a little scary. So China owns a lot of our bonds. They own a lot of dollars. They could dump them and collapse the dollar. I don't think they'll do that, but there's a lot of uncertainty in this. I think China is a grotesquely evil power. The CCP is one of the most evil things in the history of the world. Anything we can do to make sure that the U.S. Remains the superpower and China doesn't replace us, I'm all for. But we need to be smart about it. Maybe the president is surrounded by people who get exactly how to do it with China to stop their rise. That's great. They're not letting us in on all their plans on exactly how they're trying to use this as a geopolitical tool. If it just comes down to, hey, China sells us goods and they build a middle class and we don't want them to sell goods. All I know is the last time that President Trump did this, all China did is it sent intermediate goods to Thailand, and it sent them to Vietnam, and it sent them to Cambodia, and then we bought them. So it just added and our trade deficit with China increased after the Trump tariffs. So if the idea is to rebalance trade, it doesn't work because they'll just find some intermediary. If the idea is to stop China from rising as a power, that's fine. I think stuff like more missiles to Taiwan might have a little more bite than, importing fewer toys from China and them importing less soybeans from us. So I would focus on the geopolitical. Of course, the thing that we can do more than anything else that would give us a huge financial and geopolitical advantage over China is simple. Stop running budget deficits.
Yeah.
Our budget deficits are the greatest threat to the dollar. It's not China. It's us. We're imposing it on ourselves through overspending. Doge, if anything beats China, it won't be tariffs. It'll be Doge.
Jerry Bowyer, let me. We've got a few minutes left. I want to jump to another topic related to finance, economy. The president signing an executive order this week, creating the American Sovereign Wealth Fund. Explain that.
A sovereign wealth fund is a fund. A sovereign wealth fund is a fund that government puts money into, and then it controls how the money is spent. So that it's sort of like on budget, but also a little bit off budget. It's basically a Nordic thing. Nordic countries have a history of doing that. Some American states do it. In fact, I work with some of them. Like Texas has a sovereign wealth fund. Alaska has the largest sovereign wealth fund in the United States. The way they work in the United States is, let's say oil and gas revenues go into them and it automatically goes to schools. Or in Alaska, oil and gas revenues go into them and they automatically go to just Alaska citizens. In the Nordic countries, they're a little more used as tools of political manipulation. For instance, these Nordic sovereign wealth funds have tried to attack American oil by voting against the the Exxon board. I don't know what this sovereign wealth fund is going to be because the president basically did an executive order to come up with a plan. So the executive order isn't the plan. It's an executive order to come up with a plan. So there are good and bad ways to do this. And I don't know quite yet. I kind of trust the people around the president to do it smart. But until I actually see the plan, I don't know if they're going to do it the smart way.
So we don't know exactly where the revenues from this would go. Would this go to pay down our debt? I mean, what would this, any idea what it would do?
Well, the press release said something about it going to pay down our debt, but that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, the way to use revenues to pay down debt, is to simply stop
Spending.
Simply stop spending and do not just have the revenues go into the general budget. Right? If you're putting them off in some side fund, I don't understand how that pays down the debt. Now, you might want to put it in there to do investment like things like infrastructure. So don't do the infrastructure stuff or do the infrastructure stuff. And then maybe over the long run, that gives us more growth. Until we have more details, I don't know. It could be really smart. It could be a way to take some kind of infrastructure investment outside of all those rules for federal procurement rules and privatize it more and make it smarter and more Doge-like. If they do that, that's wonderful. But if they do it so that they can buy TikTok because the TikTok helped elect the president and he wants to pay them back, I mean, that's to me would be kind of corrupt.
Yeah, there's got to be transparency with this, whatever it is. But there's some creative minds here in our district, in the District of Columbia here right now. So
yes. Now, what are they going to create? That's the question.
Right. Yeah. But that's why the rules matter. I mean, I think some of the rules become. The thing about government is different. It's not business, and it was created by our founders to be slow so that people couldn't take it and corrupt it easily. Now, granted, it has been corrupted. We got to clean it up, but it moves slow, and that is by design. Jerry, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today and help educate our viewers and listeners.
My pleasure. Thank you.